I really do think deciding to join a board is one decision. Where it will lead you, you got to do the time.
If you become a leader of leaders, it's not the same as being a leader at your company of subordinates. You can either be frustrated that you're not lead singer in the band, or you can realize you're in the Eagles band and the harmony is 7 parts, which is incredible.
You don't go into this unless you're willing to do the time. So you don't go in it saying, I'm going to hit a home run around the bases, and then go on to another sport. You really are getting more at bats.
We all have something that we're passionate about, whether it's the EDPA association you are going to serve, or it's your local board. Sign up, show up.
Strong companies, lasting partnerships, powerful events. Welcome to the Experience Builders Podcast.
You know, I've always wondered, because I'm not on any boards. I think I want to get involved on a board, but you tell me if I want to get involved on a board or not. What do you think, Michael?
Well, my thought on this is, there's no substitute for experience, right? So what I would say to you today is different than what I would have said to myself or would have wanted to say to someone who's just starting. Just starting it's just like anything, you got to do the time, right? So I would say, if you're thinking about it, you get on and you do the time. If you're concerned about doing it well, you probably won't. Yeah, I think if you're doing board participation really well, then maybe the board isn't, or that particular role isn't that challenging. That makes sense?
Okay, so basically, it's a good fit, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, my first board experience was a small 70 cottage, board of directors of a collectively owned property on Cape Cod. There was 7 of us, and I learned all of the politics that that are involved with being on the board. Suddenly people think you can solve every problem, like dogs don't go to the bathroom anymore, all those little weird things. And you think this is more like a complaint center than a board, right? But then we did some really, interesting and challenging stuff, because there was an airport that went over our property, and you had to communicate with the town and the local FBO and that sort of stuff. My second opportunity was Habitat for Humanity. And what I learned there is some charitable organizations, not necessarily nonprofits, people add those to their resume. So there's a percentage of the board in that situation that is checking their box. And predominantly in those situations, a high percentage of bankers, because that is you're going up, everybody in the banking business really becomes a VP after teller, I think. And then they're on a board. And then if you're a private business owner, you're about getting things done, and you're usually in a relatively flat organization. So that was a huge learning experience. Several years in, I found out where I could add value. So I'll go back to it. You got to do the time to figure out where you fit in that space.
Okay. So you got to do the time, not in the sense of you have to make your way onto the board and fit yourself into a good seat. It's more so, you got to figure out what's best for you and where you can really add value, but what can also add value to you. Let me ask you this. What's the value that you get out of being on a board?
Well, so at this point in my career, 30 years into a business, and I really joined the board 9 years ago. It was at the point in my career where I actually could lift my head and look up at this amazing industry that had given me more than I ever expected. And I actually went to the Access event, and I witnessed Rob Cohen pretty much saying goodbye to his role in the presidency. And I saw how these professional people compete, engage. And I'm like, I just want to be around those people. It was as simple as that. I want to be around those people. And I don't even know if I can add any value here, because I'm just a small company. That's self-doubt. So that is why I wanted to be on the board. Fast forward to probably about 6 years ago. No, I would say about 4.5 years ago. And with Chris, after been on a while, you suddenly realize there is a purpose for me being here at this time with the level of experience I have. Right. So I'm going to choose to make a difference. And I don't know if I could have arrived there any earlier. So I really do think deciding to join a board is one decision. Where it will lead you, you got to do the time, right? And I don't know if there's any way. There could be some ways to compress the quality of your contribution and the efficiency of your time. I'm not sure. I'm a kind of a slow learner.
I doubt that. I think you're a pretty quick learner. Just as troubleshooting your camera, I've been through much worse experiences, Michael. You are pretty savvy. Okay, so Chris, tell me, you brought this topic up. Why do you think this is a valuable thing to talk about for board of directors? And what have you got out of boards to follow that?
Well, first of all, I'm still recovering from the statement that after bank tellers, there's only vice presidents. So I'm literally picturing the vice president of deposit slips, the vice president of drive-through operations, the vice president, and the vice president of stanchions and red velvet robes at the Bank of America up the street that I go into. And it does seem like there's a 26-year-old vice president at every turn there. So, but to answer your question, you know what? So I'm about to start the second year of my president's term, and I'm reflecting back of, there's a lot going on with EDPA. That's the association where Michael and I share in common that we serve. And, I'm thinking about what it took. I'm very comfortable with where I'm at right now, even with everything going on. But it's the 6 or 7 years that led up to this. And it's, and I, like Michael said, I wasn't ready. I'm just a small business owner. And, but here I am now. And it occurred to me, we have an enormous future leaders group coming through EDPA. We have new members joining on the time. Our full board is 25 people. And there's a fair amount of folks that are 4 years and less that have come on. And I just wondered, is there anything we can share that they might want to know in anticipation of where they're going, which is deeper into the board? And ultimately, I think many of them, hopefully, or all of them, will serve on the executive committee as an officer. So I did a brain dump a few weeks ago with Michael just about, and I said, by the way, here are the 44 things that I've learned and I've gotten better at. And so just, I just thought about volunteerism in general. I don't know that I fully appreciated, and I'm thinking about my time, their time, and all the doers in the organization, which are many with EDPA. By the way, Mike, that may not have been Michael's experience in other groups he served as a board on. I served on one other association board in the trade show industry, nowhere near the active group there. So I thought about the time demands of that. I would want to know. I would want somebody to tell me about what that means as I balance my day job. Working with strong-minded leaders. There's a lot of strong leaders. And then ultimately, if you become a leader of leaders, it's not the same as being a leader at your company or subordinates. Be quiet and listen a lot more. The leadership, let me tell you, it is everywhere. And you can either be, frustrated that you're not the lead singer in the band, or you can realize you're in the Eagles band and the harmony is 7 parts, right? Which is incredible. I've always said I can be a chief or I can be an Indian. And every month with the EDPA board work, I'm both at different moments. And I think there's preparation if you're only a boss and that's all you've been, or you've never been empowered to be a chief. Get on a Michael McMahon subcommittee for workforce, and you're going to learn what it's like to be a chief pretty darn quickly. By the way, a well-supported chief. Michael and I, we talked about this early on both in our times as executive committee. We learned what good governance of an association or a nonprofit looks like. We also went through the experience of changing governance and the structure because there had been some significant gaps. Go ahead, Khalil.
Can you, I want to understand that. I've been on trying to think, I was a part of student government and stuff like that. So I'm thinking of what governance means.
Okay.
Are this when you can speak and when you can't speak and how you get something passed? And, can you give me a rundown of good governance?
Absolutely. So the way the EDPA bylaws are set up, full board of 25 people. We had 6 or 7 on the executive committee. The executive committee really manages the association on a day-to-day. We go to the board for big decisions requiring a vote. So you've got 4 vice presidents on the executive committee. You have a president, and you have a president emeritus. You have an executive director who's kind of outside that, although they're sort of in the group. And then we have a liaison, which is another voice, which is between the EDPA Foundation and us. So, there's the mix-up. But the bylaws say that the executive committee makes those decisions. It doesn't say the president makes the decision or that vote is more important than anybody else. And depending, every year the president was changing. So when we got there, based on the strength of the leader, the individual, I'm not saying better or worse, you either had a passive person in that role in past years who really leaned on groupthink, or you had a strong person that there's a sense of urgency, we need to get this done, and that president, that year's president, would make a decision because they're a president of a company and they're used to making decisions. And yet we weren't being true to the governing rules, the bylaws required, and that is the executive committee votes. And I imagine it's a lot like the Supreme Court. There's a chief justice, and I'm sure there's some administrative responsibilities. I can tell you there's some things, but I don't view that my voice is any more important than any others. So I'll pause right there on just those few things that I touched on. Michael, are those lessons that you learned or experiences that made you a better leader? Because all of this has made me a better leader, I think, even the parts that have been challenging.
Yes, absolutely. Well, one of the things I would say is, nonprofit or an association board of directors, and maybe I'm reading into a different side of that question, Khalil, is there are organizations that follow Robert's rules, which is a formal way to navigate activity within, board activity as it transpires. So there's, open dialogue sessions, right? So those are private discussions among board members and then executive committee members in the situation of our association. At the executive committee level in the EDPA, that dialogue is not recorded, right? So it's very private. Whereas the board of directors could decide in a greater more meeting to actually record that. It's a much more structured process because you're acting as a group on behalf of the membership, and the membership, you serve at the pleasure of the membership, right? So the extent of Robert's rules in this particular association is I'm looking for a motion, and is there a second, right?
Wait, how does that differ from Marcus of Queensberry rules?
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
I'm sorry. Is it?
But anyway,
let's table that. Let's table that one.
When I was in Habitat for Humanity, we had a couple of people that were very formal and really drove all of that. So, and for my freewheeling nature, I was like, oh my gosh, this just slows everything down. So I also think that's a possibility if someone were considering participating on a board, what is the structure? What is governance like? How do people behave themselves? Maybe a little bit of research on who actually are members of the board, because Chris will probably echo what I'm going to say. We've been incredibly fortunate to be on the executive committee in our association where the depth of interest, aptitude, and action
absolutely
is incredibly high. Yeah. So much so that our executive director, he hears it from sister associations that, how are you getting all these people so active? I don't know how, other than, Chris, you and I can take a bow because we literally
it's leadership, really.
Yeah, we can. No. I think so. This is what I believe, and this is how I show up on a board. Is I believe that human beings are better critics than creators. So I have always been willing to say the thing that leads to the thing. So I'm really never as connected to the words I say as I'm interested in what happens. And on a board.
Can you give me an example of that?
Poet laureate Michael McMahon, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. Well, I would just say, so a lot of times in meetings, and I always joke with Chris, I'll say afterwards, I'll call him up and I'm like, you saw me fall on that sword, right? And he's like, oh yeah, I did. And what it is saying the thing in the room that needs to be said, because I'm not trying to move or inspire the room to like me, right? It's much different. And in an association, on an association board, you have people in different positions within the industry. Sometimes people are on the board so that they can earn new business, right? In our particular association, I actually don't require anybody that's on the board for me to do well in my profession. The benefit I get is I might meet some people and the bonding and rapport leads to an advocacy that leads to business for them, right? So, and
but
I
you
don't
know
like
what, Michael? If you go at an issue, like as you call it, falling on the sword, you're not a bomb thrower. You don't do that to hit people up for reaction. I know this about you, and I've been in the room usually, and it's something that needs to be said. It's a contrarian view that needs to be introduced. It's a discussion that needs to happen, and we're all better for it. And yet there's an awkwardness by most people, maybe, that they don't want to be the one to say that. And you have such a way of bringing up what others might call a difficult topic that it's never viewed really as personal or attack-like. It's just, it opens up the devil's advocate and the contrarian side, which makes for better decision-making. And this is something, if you're listening right now, we're talking about things that prepare you to be a good board member. And I really believe, I think we're an industry that's in service to others, but as we all age and we all have something that we're passionate about, whether it's the EDPA association you are going to serve, or it's your local board, what we're talking about, these lessons apply to all of it. And so if you're going to sign up, show up and be genuine and authentic, and don't be afraid to say, I don't know what I'm doing on this, but it seems to me, ... right? Be that person, because I think Michael talked about sort of the special sauce that we both feel exists with our leadership at EDPA. It's because people all do that. And I know that when I see somebody risk that and open up a conversation like that, I feel better raising my hand and contributing and in an honest way. And you just never know what direction the wisdom comes from. But you need You need people participating.
It reminds me a little bit. I've never been on a board. At least I don't think. Maybe I haven't. I've lost memory of it. But essentially, for about 6 years, I coached soccer at a high school. I was the head coach. I had a booster club. It was a volunteer opportunity. I got paid, but I probably put every ounce of that paycheck back into the program.
Right.
And I think what it gave me was more at-bats. It gave me an opportunity to be a better public speaker, because I had to speak not only to the varsity team, the junior varsity team, but to my coaching staff and to the parents. And so I was constantly having to come up with, what my thoughts were, what our vision was, what our strategy was going to be. And I got those at-bats speaking to many more people than I would get to inside of my company, right? I got the opportunity to, hire assistant coaches, and it was low stakes, but there were stakes. And I got to understand what the hiring process was like. I got the opportunity to, manage those assistants and make sure they were doing their job. I had to deal with, the skipping of the players come to me rather than to the, junior varsity coach. And even worse, the parent comes to me rather than to their child. who then goes to the assistant coach, who then goes to me, right? So getting to understand kind of the hierarchy of things, I had to learn how to sell things in terms of we needed donors to our program. And it's not like they were, it wasn't a good opportunity. They were doing it because they were being generous, not because they were getting a lot of value out of it. So I think that's probably for the young emerging leaders that are out there that are curious whether they should join the board or not. It's an opportunity to volunteer, but really what you're getting out of it is not that you're going to close this deal or you're going to get this new job. You're going to get more at-bats. And if you handle those at-bats really well, it could lead to the next job opportunity. It could lead to the next sell or relationship, but it's more about the at-bat.
And you don't realize, Khalil. So fundraising is on my list of things you learn, right? And so to your point, in that role you were in, whether it's for shirts or shoes or travel, gas, hotels, van repairs to get a team around, fundraising is fundraising. And none of us want to, nobody necessarily likes it. By the way, my experience is women are much better at it than men are. But the point is, if you care about something and if you're in service as a board or an executive committee or an officer, you're talking it up. And you don't say, that's not my box. I'm not in charge of that. We're all in charge of it if we're trying to make a healthy organization. So let me ask you, we were just, talking about how do you develop. That was two things on my list I've learned how we now identify qualifying board members and what are we doing intentionally to develop qualified board members? And I go back to when I was just an EDPA member, right? I think back in the day, there were board members that just wanted to put it on their resume, to Michael said, right? Or they wanted their logo on a website or a business card and said, I did that, or it looks good. But they just kind of mailed it in. And, those days are over. And I think we had chapters, some really committed people. We had a couple of chapters that were big. I would argue now 8 or 9 chapters, all of them do fundraising in their community. All of them get new people in to experience EDPA at a local or regional level before so I look at the chapters as really that's the recruiting ground for the national board. And the national board is the farm team for the executive committee. So we've created, I think, a structure that this association can live on and be just as strong as it is today because we care about those regional positions and those exposing people to doing more than just, hey, let's call these guys because it's a big company and they'll write checks. It's just, and there was a time I give full credit to guys like Bill Haney and Dursey and Dave Wallens at Brewmark and Dan Cantor at Hamilton, who there's a half a dozen companies that just wrote big checks to keep the association going at a time where we didn't have the level of engagement with members we do now. Well, now we do. And I mean, there's as much financial support showing up at the regional chapter level as there is at the HQ level. So, that's not an accident. So I think building your bench and your strength there.
Well, you have to build the bench because if you don't, when someone leaves and there's no one to fill it, it becomes a big problem. And if you only have all-stars, I think that you're in big trouble when someone leaves because it's just like at your company, you have a key person who's doing really 5 different roles, but they're so good they can do all 5. As soon as that person leaves, you're not going to be able to replace that person. You have to find 5 different replacements, and that's tall order. I'm curious, how did you juggle, Michael, being president? I know Chris is in that role now, but how did you juggle being president, but also owner of your company? How did you manage all the 2 roles?
This is kind of a sore subject with a lot of us in the EC. I won't embarrass Michael, but president of the EDPA is not something he'll be putting on his resume. No, Michael opted out. By the way, that was one of the beautiful things about this organization. There is not a person you can point to that has contributed any more than Michael McMahon has to this association. But Michael, because he's involved in Habitat and other CEO groups, and he is fully in service to his employees and executive team, he just said, I have the option of opting out of being president. As a favor to me, he said, I'll stay on the EC 1 year of your 2-year term, and he's going to still remain for his full term on the board. But and by the way, that is a great thing for anybody considering board work. You should know there should be a beginning and an end, and you should know that going in. So, these open-ended services, I don't know that I would use the S word, but I did read the Emancipation Proclamation, and I know that slavery was abolished at some point. But, Michael McMahon and Hill and Partners is never not going to be, I think, a signature company in the EDPA. But it is no longer a requirement that if you get on the executive committee ride that you serve as a president. But let me tweak that question a little bit. How do you balance the high level of volunteerism that you've shown, Michael, with the day job, which is really demanding in our industry? Any suggestions about that?
Well, the problem I have is there's a bunch of people in my head. So one person is way back with Khalil saying you get a lot more times at bat. I don't know exactly what the language was. You get more at bats, correct? Yeah. My language is you have to do the time. I love that analogy. It may fall short with some potential board members, but the reason why that works so well is, first of all, you don't go into this unless you're willing to do the time. So you don't go in it saying, I'm going to hit a home run around the bases, and then go on to another sport. You really are getting more at bats. I think the way you described your situation in sports is, by the way, someone's pitching and somebody's throwing at your head, right? So you get more opportunities to handle chin music. And that happens in the board situation. So I love that analogy. I really do, because really, if you don't want to take your swings, you can't just stand there, right? So that's what it is. And I would say in your first year on a board, if the board is interested in succession or development in succession, then they're throwing underhand for those first few pitches, right? They're wanting you to get on base. They're wanting you to be part of the game. And I think the board that I'm on with Chris, we really are stewards for people that join. In other words, we are for them the way people were for us, right? And then we've tweaked it a little bit because we have our own perspective. So that being said, I'm going to steal that analogy because I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
The balancing thing, I think this is, I thought a lot about this, is there's no way that I could have been a strong contributor to this association board 15 years ago, because my head was down. As far as I was concerned, my company would not survive without me. There's some people on their deathbed, their company still won't survive without me. Right now, I could leave and no one would notice me gone. So that's a great thing. I get to be on a board and I get to actually do more than I anticipated because I have the space, right? So there's always the balance. For me, it worked out because I got to watch these people and not know what I'm doing long enough, and then have my opportunity and preparedness to be available catch up. And then suddenly I'm in this sweet spot where, I'm flying somewhere on behalf of the EDPA. And when Chris has done it a lot, it's easy for me, but it might be difficult for someone in my organization who's in the next layer of management.
Michael, can I ask? So, because I want to be conscious of our time. I know we're not going to get to everything. You alluded to earlier being part of an associate or being on a board, and you said you felt like there were decisions being made in that group to keep people's job. This had paying jobs, right? Within the I think it was a nonprofit association, but still had employees, right? And so at what point, in other words, there was work that kept people employed rather than whether that jibed with the original mission and vision, or it sort of went astray. I think about the board work you and I are doing, and I think about, so here's the question, or the reminder to the next group up. When do you form a committee for something? When do you form a subcommittee? How do you keep from just doing work for the sake of work to make everybody feel included? Because just like I believe in smaller government, I believe in smaller but governance without neglecting what the necessary pieces are. So how do you decide when you're going to create another tentacle?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, so part of board work is, governance, finance, membership, sponsorships, all those sort of things that happen. But I think if you get into the initiative game, which is what we're in, there's a point at which you have an idea how you can make a difference for the community that you represent. And that demands a certain level of attention and energy in a volunteer environment. So, there's a story I use. I don't know if it resonates with people, but I kind of feel like volunteerism is on conch time. So whatever you thought you could accomplish in your work life, you're moving slowly like a snail when it comes to the volunteerism. And then if you're surrounded by volunteers, the same thing's true for them. They have a paying gig, and then they have to squeeze in their volunteerism.
Great point.
What most achievers attempt to do is be super efficient with their volunteer time. So they rush to product. I actually think people do better work when they're fully engaged. They like what they do. So my approach is, let's do less better. And the stuff we do, let's have fun doing it. And by the way, you can be in charge if you want to. And then the only advice I give those people is, remember, the people that you'd like to do stuff for you also have a paying job. And then when you get people into the cadence of that work, then you set goals that are they're
achievable within that cadence that they
right. They're realistic to achieve, and you set a time frame that maybe would be a little bit ridiculous in your work life. Like, we would like to accomplish this in the next 6 months. And most entrepreneurs are like, is it done yet? And they just finished telling everybody, so it's, so the balance comes from really understanding how it all works. Again, you have to get as many at bats to begin to understand it. I love that analogy.
For both of you, final question to kind of end on, I'm thinking from the emerging leader's perspective, what is one thing you wish you would have told your young former self getting onto the first board you are? What is the advice that you have of actually making it worth your while? Obviously, we've got to do our time. It's going to get us more at bats, but what is it that what do I need to know going into this? Mm-hmm. Fire away, whoever's ready. I know that's on the spot question.
Great question.
I just have something very simple to say. I would say, be interested, not interesting. Okay. So be interested, not interesting, because everybody that's that does this, they're going to be interesting people. So be interested in those people, and be interested in what the challenges are, and less interested in what you might look like in the room, which there's a person in everybody's head, right? The ego is like, how do I stack up? So I would say be interested versus interesting.
Yeah.
That's great. And you know what? With all these great things I wrote down, I'm going to fucking end with a McMahonism, which is one of my favorites. But this really sums it up. Michael's constantly reminding me, and as reminded DC,
and do less better.
To do less better. And you know what it is? Very few of you that are listening that are going to get into service of board work in your own neighborhoods or for the Experiential Designer Producer Association you're not starting something from scratch. So you don't have the burden. So right now, there are 4 pillars, of this 70-year-old organization, right? It's good works, it's advocacy, it's education, and it's great networking events. That's what we do. So there's a few new, really important strategic initiatives that have branched out, like workforce development, when the pandemic knocked us for a loop, like sustainability, which is becoming important to our mutual customers. But for the most part, there's all kinds of things we can say we want to fix and get involved in, and the wrongs that we want to right. Your true north compass should be the 4 pillars, right? And whether you're Habitat for Humanity, whether you're a women's shelter, whether you're the EDPA, they already have a mission statement. So come in and add value and improve what it is that's already being done. And you really can't go wrong. But it's not hard to end up in a situation where you're overreaching. But think budget driven. We do what we can, not always what we should. But do less better is a great reminder that you're not cheating at anybody, you're not failing at anything, if that's your true north compass. So that's my one.
Less is more. Yeah.
Less is more.
Well, really interesting. I'm curious from our audience if there's other questions they have about nonprofit boards, association boards. And I'm going to try to join a board soon. This is timely for me. Now that I'm not coaching soccer anymore, now I'm going to move into the more professional realm. It'll be interesting. So thank you guys for your wisdom. And we'll have you on again, Michael. I think this is your 3rd time. So hopefully we'll get another one out of you.
I'm getting used to this.
There's a prize. There's a prize if you hit 6. It's a robe with your initials.
Excellent. Looking forward to it.
You sound like an association president that's trying to get more people to join the board.
I just want them to join our goals.
Yeah.
No, thank you
great.
as always, Michael. It's great to have you.
Yeah.
All right. Pleasure, guys.
All right, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to the Experience Builders podcast. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more great content. Visit our website at crewxp.com to learn more about us. See you in the next one.